I teach here and I live in Surrey, and I've been involved working with a number of the folks that organize things here, organizing a range of events over the years. Some events through, some of you may remember the old Red Sparks Union, and it's really fantastic to see so many folks here today and such active and engaged discussion and conversation. I really appreciate that. I know that it can be difficult organizing on this campus, our commuter campus, and also getting folks to come up to Surrey sometimes who aren't from Surrey. I've been involved with the Critical Criminology Working Group, which we started as a way of actually using the tools and some of the analysis of criminology to deal with the actual social harms and the sources of social harm in our society. And that means, of course, if we're looking at real social harms, the sources of social harms are the state and capital. It's the system. It's a capitalist system of exploitation. It's not the stuff that too much of criminology wastes its time on, studying low-level, less harmful activities, right? The things that criminologists are preoccupied with. So we said if criminologists actually took themselves and their work seriously, they'd be entirely focused on studying exploitation, capitalism, state crime, and the crimes of capital. I'm going to talk today about some of the specific issues around policing and developments around policing in Surrey. But first, I want to say that and really frame things by saying that when it comes to policing in capitalist societies, and really policing as we know it develops as part of a central feature of capitalist societies. It's a key component in the development of capitalist societies. But when we talk about policing in capitalist societies, we're fundamentally, the purpose of policing is to create, maintain, and reproduce systems of exploitation and oppression. And so while we'll talk about some of the specifics of policing, I want to emphasize that. That means in the Canadian context, and this is true of liberal democracies as well, right? I mean, it's the fundamental feature of liberal democracies, even though we like to tell ourselves a whole bunch of stories about the nature of policing in Canada and being less violent and things like that. That we're talking about colonialism, we're talking about dispossession, displacement, we're talking about the repression of the working class, we're talking about the construction of labor markets where people are forced to sell themselves in order to survive on a day-to-day basis. We're talking about also systems in which productive subjects are produced too, right? So that is, we internalize the values, morals, norms that are reinforced by policing systems, that are market values, right, that contain us within these systems of market exchange, and which play out in a whole range of ways, getting us to demean and degrade other members of the working class who are not having a success on the labor market, for example, looking down on people who are poor and homeless, acting as gatekeepers in our neighborhoods and things like that. So it's important to look at the way that those sort of soft and psychological aspects of policing get played out too. And I say that to preface the discussion of specific forms of policing in Surrey, to say that we always need to keep that in mind, or else we get kind of drawn into getting caught up in the newness, the novelty, the specifics, or new forms of policing, new developments in policing, which are then particularly bad or particularly brutal compared to other forms. Policing is bad. Policing is brutal. That's its structure. That's its function. That's where it comes from. That's what it's intended to do. Okay? So having said that, I want to spend a little bit of time looking at some specifics of policing in Surrey, and in particular the sort of layered policing that is being played out in the city. This is sometimes called tiered policing, sometimes called plural policing, but what it amounts to is the spread of policing into a whole range of areas of everyday life, of social life, and of areas of activity, from streets through the schools to this campus, right? And when we talk about layered policing, we're talking about a whole range of intersections of formal public policing. We're also talking about private policing and security. We're talking about volunteers and the recruitment of young people, especially into volunteer positions to act as auxiliary cops. And we're talking about partnerships with schools, a range of activities. And we can see the way that this plays out in different contexts too. So just to give you also an example of some of the outfits that we're dealing with here, street ambassadors that are supported by business improvement associations, a Surrey Crime Prevention Society that really preys upon that sort of internalization of policing perspectives amongst youth and younger people, recruiting them to go out into neighborhoods and target really, survival activities, right? So they're going after people for littering or for panhandling, for really low-level drug transactions, things like that, right? And we also have auxiliary police that do some of the road functions of the police to free up the cops to do other things. A lot of this stuff is not paid. It's volunteer. It's kind of the height of neoliberalism. The height of neoliberalism, right? Where you don't even get paid for your work. You volunteer on the prospect that maybe somewhere down the road, the fact that you're doing all of this policing work will maybe get you paid or become an actual formal cop at some point. So how does it play out in different areas? We can think about one example that has gotten some attention outside of Surrey, and that's 135A Street in Whalley, the Strip, an area where there are numbers of homeless people who are living, who are self-housed in tents on 135A, an area that is very much targeted for monetization and gentrification, right? A quickly gentrifying area, city government, transnational capital. They're building this like massive international hotel right in the middle of this. Right? So global elites can fly in, stay at the hotel, and then this institution actually is offering these really expensive business courses, which will only be available for people studying the business courses. It was supposed to be actually a community research space, and we were supposed to have a social justice center space there, but they took that away, and now they've turned it over to these business classes only.
Wow.
Right? So it's literally this high-end hotel. Yeah, the global elites fly in, stay at the hotel, take a whatever, incredibly high tuition weekend course, and then fly out again. And what this has meant, of course, is quick gentrification. We've got, there's a character that's bought up literally a whole block along Whalley, which he has said he's going to transform into Yaletown in Surrey, which is a really exclusive, Yaletown, a part of Vancouver that, again, highly gentrified and monetized. So on the Strip, police and the various layers of policing, the Crime Prevention Society, the street ambassadors, as well as bylaw enforcement, are highly active there, not only regulating the movement and the activities of homeless people who are living on the Strip, but literally have produced an open-air prison there, right, where people are contained on the Strip, on that strip of 135A. So the cops will stop people from leaving. They'll literally do checks of people who are leaving the street, or checks of people who are trying to come to the street for whatever reason. Either they live there, or they're going there. They're working with people. They're acting in solidarity and so forth. So you have this tightly contained space. Now, part of the reason they're doing it, one, they want to contain people because the Strip is behind the main sort of commercial spaces. It's at the back of the commercial spaces, so they can contain people in a space that is kind of out of sight of of business, but also outside of customers and tourists and things like that. But the other part of it is that by containing people there, they're restricting people's autonomy. So they express some concern at the city level of people setting up a real sort of organized, active, autonomous, self-determining tent city with political sort of pointedness to it, so they can contain people there under their terms, right? And they've set up surveillance cameras as well as the various policing mechanisms. And incredibly, they finally actually got a harm reduction facility on the Strip. But to access it, you have to go past a phalanx of surveillance cameras, right? So you can't. Yeah, right. It's right next to the cop shop, which they've set up this cop shop there with like a fancy gazebo. I don't know why they did a gazebo, but a little roving police station, right? So we can think about that and the violations that occur there, where police and working with bylaw go in on a regular basis, tear down people's tents, tear open people's tents, trash people's belongings, steal people's belongings, subject people to unannounced entrances of cops into their tents, so while people are changing, unclothed, and so forth, and the violence that on different levels that goes along with that. We can also talk about some other things that are happening as we move down King George Highway. They tried to gentrify it by calling it a boulevard. It's a highway. But along King George Highway, where police and bylaw have been openly working for years now to shut down trailer parks. Yeah, the trailer parks are some of the last remaining sort of lower cost housing in the area, where people may own the trailer, right, and may have owned it for generations, right, for decades, but they don't own the land that the trailer is on. So police and bylaw have been harassing people living in the parks and also harassing some of the owners around issues, and it's the same sort of thing in terms of the demonization and stigmatization and the techniques that they're using, talking about, well, there's drug trade happening in that park, there's sex work happening in that park, or sex workers are living in the park. They're using that to ticket people, and people are then faced with eviction. Those of you who have a chance to go back via King George, go up King George, and you'll see on each side what used to be vital, vibrant, long-standing living spaces where lots of people lived. We're talking about thousands of people, right? Those parks are all gone. What you will see are signs and fences where the parks used to be, and on a one-per-one basis, those parks have signs on the fences that say, future home of this condo development, this townhouse development. So they're sold like that for a complete upscaling. But it's happening with the policing, with the repressive actions of the state and bylaw first. To move into Newton, if we go a little bit further, and again we see the same sorts of things happening in terms of this, and there it's very active with the Business Association, with tiered policing, street ambassadors, the Crime Prevention Society, right along with the RCMP detachment there. Surrey's the largest RCMP operation, municipal RCMP operation in Canada as well, so we need to know that too. Schools, and I realize I'm getting to the end of my time. When we talk about schools in Surrey, we're talking about the gang task force, and we're talking about a broad gang panic in the city, which is renders virtually any youth or young person a gangster in the making. Right, that's the lens through which our youth in Surrey are viewed, particularly on a racist basis, on a highly racialized basis. So the task force works closely on different levels. There are presentations to classes, liaisons with the schools, and it's like that. It's a snap for kids to get caught up in this. 3 or 4 kids hanging out, having some text back and forth or a chat over social media, and they're getting a little bit boisterous or rambunctious, and maybe some push and shove happens, not even on the school ground, a block or two away from the school. The principals and vice principals will come, take them back to the school, even though they're not on school property, they're away from school property, take them back to the school, lean on kids to hand over their phones, access their phones, say, hey, you got into a fight, and we saw that you were having a conversation of whatever kind, 3 or 4 of you, before you had the fight. That's a gang. That's gang communication. Gang communication, right? And those kids, they get brought back into the principal's office, scared shitless, leaned on. They don't feel that they can say, oh, you're not touching my phone or anything like that. The pressures are very real. And what happens to those kids then is they get split up, right? They get driven out of their school. They get driven out of their social environment. They get driven out of their friendship networks. They get driven out of their support systems, and oftentimes they just are kind of left to drift. They take a long time to finish. They get put into placements where there might only be a couple of other kids who've been targeted in their classroom. They have no sort of social communication, no opportunity for their own sort of camaraderie and cultures there. It can take them a long time to finish, may not finish, but by not finishing, they show up as a success, right? Because the cops can say, look, we diverted someone who was going to be in a gang. They have nothing to suggest they were going to be in a gang. They don't have to provide any evidence that that's the case, but they rescued someone who was going to be a gang, so give us more money. And they get it. They get it, right? And they've had ridiculous things like kids walking past a fight and walking the dog. At the time, the principal comes and grabs the kid with the dog and says, you brought a weapon to a fight, right? So now you're a real gangster. Well, take it a little bit closer to my own workplace here. We're seeing this in the universities as well. So what we can see, for example, there are 2 main universities active in Surrey. This one, obviously, KPU, and Simon Fraser University has a campus here as well. Now, one of the things that the government has done, now this was clearly the Liberal government, which didn't have a repressive project that they didn't enjoy funding, but what they've done is to actually fund 2 criminology programs in the same area, which they typically wouldn't do, right? They say, well, you've got one program in horticulture, you're not going to have a second one in the same catchment area or whatever, in the same FTE area. So, but they've got 2 criminology programs, and increasingly, we've seen this change over time, certainly at this institution. One of the things that the police are doing is to target these institutions as placements for cops, to get cops to come in as faculty. They're not trained in criminology, right? They're not trained in criminology. They don't have an analysis. They don't have a social analysis of criminal justice institutions, histories, organizations, social structures, and so forth. What they do is they come in to recruit. They get access to our kids. They get access to the students, right? They carry out a recruitment function. They make promises to kids that, depending on how you act in this class, maybe we can give you a nice reference and help you along your way on your career. They put all sorts of inducements out. They're bringing money in as well for co-op programs and for placements, for educational placements through practicum programs and things like that. Now, what is happening as this develops is a discourse that suddenly the commitment is not to developing critical analysis and critical thinking in the students, it's to get students jobs. And where are they getting jobs? Well, getting them jobs in the criminal justice institutions, right? Which then, then they need to hire more cops to do that, which is public money, okay? This is public money that is supposed to be set aside to educate, not to propagandize, not to recruit, right? This is to educate. But faculty are losing those positions. So who's getting hired? Not faculty who come from sociology or criminology programs, who have an analysis of the state, who have an analysis of criminal justice systems, and can share that with students and develop that understanding. It's cops who can come and tell you how to beat somebody, and they literally talk about this stuff. I hear students who are concerned about their own education telling me this is the kind of stuff that gets discussed in those classrooms, right? So on the one hand, there's this recruitment function that is public money funding the cops to build the state, and targeting students who I've already said, they're coming out of the high schools. They're already getting the message of criminalization and gang discourse and all of that stuff when they're in our high schools, and then they're coming to university. So there's that additional sort of susceptibility or pressure or entree that the cops have to get at them. The other thing they're building is not just recruitment, they're also building snitch lines and snitch cultures throughout our community. Right? Because the students that they're not recruiting to actually join the force onto paid positions, well, they're recruiting them into the Crime Prevention Society, they're recruiting them into the auxiliaries, they're recruiting them into all of those layered agencies that I talked about and practices that I talked about. So they're getting free labor that way. But they're also getting those kids, hey, why don't you tell us about your cousin? Why don't you tell us about your uncle? Right? And they're actually getting research projects through an ethics board that is either asleep or corrupt, to do research, to supervise honor students doing research, where they're telling a supervisor who's actually a cop information about gang activity, drug use, drug trade in their communities. Right? So, I know I'm over time. The last thing that I'll highlight is something that people can look into further, and this is really an example, again, of this integrated policing and the way it's layering, right? Policing is layering throughout our everyday social lives. It's not just on the streets or the cops on patrol or whatever. It's literally in areas of our social interaction where we think we're just living our lives, right? And one of the things they've developed is the Surrey Mobilization and Resiliency Table. Surrey Mobilization and Resiliency Table. You can set it up. They're very proud of this. If you didn't figure out the acronym UGG, it's SMART, right? They like to call stupid things the opposite of what they are, but that's typical practice. But it involves police, correction, you can see this right on their site, there, straight up front, police, corrections, housing, health, social services, income assistance, and education, right? These are who they're working with. And they name them: BC Housing, Fraser Health, Ministry of Childhood and Family Development, the Surrey School District, obviously, along with the RCMP and the Attorney General. And here's the other part of it. They actually are working with, and they name it, this is their terminology, private sector. And a Kirk Fisher of the Lark Group is a representative for the private sector, but I guess that's not enough of a representation for the private sector. They also have representation from the Surrey Downtown Business Improvement Association, which I thought it's all capital. They don't use the term capital because that would make it too clear, right? So I'll just end there. What they're doing, and I mentioned this in a conversation at the break, what this does is to not kind of make random or informal references to the cops from social services or health or other areas. It institutes it. It institutes it. So it means it's always happening on an integrated basis. So someone ends up at the hospital, you can get the reference right to the cops. Right? Someone's getting housing, and this is what they're doing, tracking people who they're housing from the strip. Automatically, the cops are involved in that. So it renders that regular practice, not just occasional practice. It literally institutes it through the system. And then finally, I'll just mention, because I think it's important to mention too, that the cops are killing us out here, literally. Just over the last couple of years, and I'll just mention Hudson Brooks, a young man who was shot and killed by cops in South Surrey. Navarone Woods, similarly killed by transit police in Whalley. And just over 2 months ago, someone in South Surrey again who we don't even know much about because they don't release this information and document it systematically in the Canadian context, but who was killed because they were going to get addiction support in South Surrey, and the place that they went to turned them away because they seemed like they were on something, which incredible stuff. So the person that they encountered actually said, well, we're not going to take you in, we're going to call the cops. Well, that's a great thing to tell the person. So they tried to get away, and the cops came, and in the arrest, the person died. This has been legitimized in the media, and police replay this. It's more propaganda that, well, of course, because the person was, again, on something, what do you expect, right? So these are some of the things that we're dealing with specifically in the Surrey context. We have a lot of organizing work to do out here under circumstances where we lack some of the resources and infrastructures and the connections across those resources and infrastructures that exist elsewhere in the Lower Mainland. Thanks.
I'm going to take Robert next, or do you want to?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, you sure?
Okay.